Cheers, Lana. She can take it from here.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying that I am willing to bet you use different writing styles all the time and you don't even think about it. And to illustrate this, I would like you to imagine that you are asking for money. We've all been there. So how would it look if you were to ask, say, your mum for money? Probably something like this. Hi, Mum. Hope you and Dad are well. Me and Fido are pretty good. Can I ask a favour, though? I've got some bills coming up that are due before payday. Is there any chance I could borrow some money until next month? Love you lots, your favourite daughter. But what if you were asking for money not from your mum, but from a friend? Might look more like this. Hey, I know this is a huge thing, but is there any chance I could borrow some money from you till payday? You know I'm good for it. Thanks, mate. They're both pretty standard. You're clearly a little bit more formal with your parents or your family than you are with your friends, and that's probably because your parents taught you when you were growing up to show a little respect. We show respect through the niceties, things like asking after the health of the person you're talking to, signing off with a note of affection. With your friends, you can be a little bit more informal. That's probably because you see them more often. You're probably in a similar social situation in terms of age, class, financial stability. And you can dispense with the more formal language. You're probably also going to use a different medium to communicate with them. You're more likely to have an email or a phone call with your mum or a text message with your friends. But what happens when it's not a friend or family you're asking for money from, but it's your boss? Probably looks more like this. As you can, I won't read that for the record. You can have fun on your own. There are differences between how we speak to different members of our friend and family groups, but there's a vast gulf between how we talk to them and the language that we use at work. So what I'd like to do in this talk is to investigate why it is that we do that. Really, it all comes down to what writers refer to as style. I'm hoping you're familiar with the Duke Ellington song. Louis Armstrong did a version as well. It says, "It ain't the melody and it ain't the music. There's something else that makes this tune complete. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." Style is for writing like swing is for music. It's more than just words or grammar. It's about the way you convey your message. In order to understand this, the main thing you need to remember is that all sentences have an actor, an action, and an acted upon. So if the actor is a zombie, the action is 8, and the acted upon is my brain. Sometimes we don't need to include all these things in a sentence. We can let the audience infer some of those details. So if we were in the middle of, say, an episode of The Walking Dead, and I yelled out, "My brain got eaten," you're probably instantly going to think, yep, that was a zombie. If, however, I was in the lunchroom at work, and I yelled out, "My brains were eaten," you're probably not going to think instantly zombie. You're going to think, why is someone bringing brains to work to eat? They are delicious. So the point I'm trying to make here is that it's really important that if we're relying on our audience to infer that information, that we make it immediately clear from the surrounding text or the surrounding information, so that they understand exactly what we mean. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to give you an idea of three main styles of communication that we use primarily at work. You're probably already very familiar with what we might call bureaucratic or politicians' English. This is the kind of writing where you can say a whole lot of words without actually saying much at all. Your instant response to this kind of language should be, but what does that mean? In bureaucratic English, what happens is that we start leaving out the actor. So we had our zombie actor before. In bureaucratic English, we leave that out. So to do this, we actually turn verbs into nouns, and then we refer to them. So instead of using the verb to appear, we make it into the noun appearance. Then instead of appearing, which is nice and simple and direct, we refer to it and we say we make an appearance. These are sometimes referred to as zombie nouns. And that's because they kind of lumber around in the sentence with no apparent actor. It makes our writing far too verbose. Basically, to make an appearance is obviously much longer than appear. And because it leaves out the actor in the sentence, it puts a whole lot of cognitive load onto our audience to try and work out what's going on. This explains why managers, politicians, and especially lawyers love it. All of a sudden, they don't need to specify who the actor is. And that means you can say things like, mistakes were made, or a review will be forthcoming, without having to take any kind of personal responsibility. The person doing the action becomes totally ambiguous. So if you find yourself writing like this, my recommendation to you is to go away, have a good, long, hard think about what you're trying to say, and come back with 100% fewer leveraging synergies. Next up is what we might call technical writer's English. Pretty much I will admit this is from my own product, just for the record. Pretty much every manual ever is written in this language. It's usually in second person. It uses a fair bit of passive language, and it has constructions like ensure that you and once you have. Technical writer's English is more specific than bureaucratic English, and that's because it's usually dealing with steps that need to be performed that are quite concrete. But it also relies on these zombie nouns, just like bureaucratic English does. And that's because we're trying to express ideas in a really hands-off, almost clinical way. Generally speaking, it's why technical writing is so damn dry to read. Nobody ever took a technical manual to bed just because they were enjoying the story so much. Many technical writers will have you believe that the answer to this dry technical English is to make your language super casual or to throw in a few jokes. It is highly problematic, and I recommend you don't, mostly because casual and joking language is highly culturally specific. That is fine if you're writing for a very small known audience, but if you're putting it on the internet, if you've got a diverse audience, or if your work is going to be translated, like many manuals are, casual phrasing, abbreviations, jargon, and especially humour is not going to make sense to everyone, and in some cases could be quite offensive. So try not to do that. The final style I'd like to talk about, and this is obviously the one I recommend you aim for, you can tell that by the stars, has several different names. So you might see it called simplified English, plain English, or classic English. All of these names do have slightly different definitions, but generally speaking, they all refer to a style that uses fewer words, specific meanings, and simplified grammar. Classic English tells a story. It starts with the most important information, and it guides the reader through a series of logical steps that build neatly on each other. That is harder to do than you might think. It's very easy for me to stand up here and say that. Usually when we write, we start with our own knowledge, and then we write down things as they occur to us. And that leads to what I like to refer to as upside down writing, because it starts with the more interesting, complicated bits, and then you gradually get more and more information until you understand what the thing is. And what we want to do is start with the simpler things and then build on that knowledge to get to the more complicated stuff. The trick with classic language is to organize every part of your writing like this. So you need to choose the simplest words to convey your message, and then the whole document needs to go from simplest to most complicated. Each chapter has to go from simplest to most complicated. Each paragraph has to go from simplest to most complicated. And you guessed it, every sentence has to go from simplest to most complicated. In most cases, classic English is the clearest way to get your message across. It is, I think, the only way to speak directly to your reader, and it's possibly the only way to really make sure that your message is understood by everyone who's reading. When you complicate your writing and you ask your readers to do too much, your message gets lost. It's the first thing to go. So to summarize, in classic English, you have actors doing things and producing results, and there's a straightforward narrative. In bureaucratic English, we have zombie nouns lumbering around, doing things without their actors. And technical writers' English is some kind of unhappy marriage between the two. So now that we have a better idea of some of the writing styles we see in the workplace, what I want to take a look at is the effects that these styles can have on readers. Humans are really freaking complicated, and we act on instinct probably more than any of us would like to admit. The best way to show you how this works is to take a look at a couple of linguistic studies. They're both fairly recent, and they certainly aren't the only studies into this kind of thing. They're not unique outliers or anything like that. I've picked them mostly because they complement each other quite nicely, and we can get an idea of the range of outcomes, range of readers. So first of all, abstract language is general or non-specific. It implies a distance from the subject at hand. So in this first study, they discovered that abstract language signaled power. The people with the most power in our country are, arguably, politicians. When politicians talk about an event, they tend to use really abstract language. This example is from Prime Minister Scott Morrison earlier in the month. He says, while the weather conditions have improved, there are still many fires that are raging, and there's a very significant firefighting effort which is continuing. It will take some time and will require a considerable amount of effort. There is no detail here. Weather conditions have improved. There are many fires. We have significant effort. It will take some time. The purpose of this statement is not to give us information, clearly. It's to reassure us. The study found that we tend to perceive abstract statements like that to indicate that the speaker is in control. And they're across things. They're sitting above it and looking over it for us. So when we hear our managers say things like, we're using iterative approaches to a corporate strategy to foster collaborative thinking and further the overall value proposition, what we're really hearing is not any of those words. It's, I'm sitting at the top of this organization, I am looking over things, I have control, and you can trust me. There is a caveat here, of course. Abstract language like this is not just used by powerful people. It's also used by people who have no idea what they're talking about. And this study very accurately, I think, explains why sometimes we have problems working out which is which. Moving on to the second study is about concrete language. Concrete language is the opposite, essentially, to abstract language. And concrete language is specific. It includes details, and it often emphasizes a particular fact or issue. In this case, the speaker is a participant in the action. They are faithfully reporting from the front line, if you will. And that's why journalists use it. Our journalists use concrete language all the time. This is an example also from the bushfires that came from the ABC, talking about the impact on our wildlife. More than $75,000 has gone out to koala hospitals in the state so far. Ms. Blum said there are plans to help communities in Coffs Harbour, Toowoomba, Boonah, Ipswich and Yeppoon in the way of grants for hospitals along with supplies for local carriers. There's a huge amount of detail there. We've got exact figures. We know exactly which towns they're in. We know exactly where the money's going. So the second study we're looking at, it found that concrete language signaled truthfulness. We have a tendency to think that statements that have more detail are more likely to be true. Another aspect of this is that concrete statements are easier for us to understand and to remember. So you're much more likely to trust the information you're getting, remember it, and then pass it on to other people. I'm sure you've already worked out the caveat to this. People can make up concrete statements just as easily as they can make up abstract ones. So just because it gives you what looks like hard facts, you probably need to do a little bit more reading before you hit like. To summarize, if you want to sound powerful, be abstract, and if you want to sound truthful, be concrete. So now you know some of the fundamental reasons why humans choose different writing styles and why humans react differently to different writing styles. When we write, the primary thing we are trying to do is encourage our readers to act. Trying to encourage them to act in a particular way, usually. So in order to do that, we appeal to some really base human emotions, and we do it almost without thinking. It comes very naturally to us. Because we don't put a huge amount of thought into it, it does happen quite instinctually, it can lead to some unexpected outcomes. And that's probably why sometimes when you read something, you're almost instantly turned off. Why is it that when I read this paragraph, my instant reaction is to roll my eyes? I'll allow you to read that yourself. Usually that reaction is because the writing isn't intended for you. So you're just not the audience. That could be because you're not, it also could be because you're not receiving the message that's being sent for some other reason. The writer might have intended for you to be the audience, but you're not getting it. So the reason you might not be in the right frame of mind, you might not be receiving the message, maybe because you're not interested. You might be more cynical than the writer expected you to be. Or you might have past experience that is colouring your view, changing the way you interpret the message. I'm not going to play the video, but I'd like you to take, for example, the Prime Minister's recent video about bushfire support. It did get endless replays, so I'm hoping most of you have seen it. The style of that video, complete with the boppy background music, is absolutely in keeping with other messages the Prime Minister's office have put out over the years he's been Prime Minister. This one didn't land because we, the audience, were in a different frame of mind, so we didn't receive the message. The end result, of course, is that the person sending the message ends up looking like a fool. So I'm hoping that none of you are political leaders in a climate crisis, that we can all learn something about crafting messages from that one. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about grammar rules, and I promise you I'll try not to bore you too much. The main problem with grouping writing styles and recommending one over the other is that in order to tell you to use a particular writing style, I need to give you some rules so that you can actually write like that. You've probably seen most of the rules that writers stand up on stages like this and tell you. They're things like use active voice, don't finish a sentence with a preposition, don't split infinitives, don't use the singular they. The problem with these rules, the problem with these writing rules is that a whole lot of them are actually bogus. Just about everyone who tells you to follow these rules will actually break them, sometimes in the very sentence that they tell you to use them. Strunk and White very famously used passive voice to tell people not to use passive voice, and that was 50 years ago. George Orwell also told people not to use passive voice in one of his essays, and he used passive voice 3 times. So, yeah, people create these rules, and they're very good at telling people to follow them, and then they break them all the time. Even if by some miracle you manage to never, ever, ever break a grammar rule, ever, your writing can still suck. I'm sorry. Sometimes it could be worse. So I'd like to digress really quickly. What value does money have? Does anyone like to take a guess? Is there an answer from there? I have a plushie for anyone who'd like to answer. Correct, absolutely. Money has no intrinsic value in and of itself, it's just pieces of paper. It has value because we as a society give it value. We imbue it with value, if you will. Grammar rules are exactly the same. Dictionaries don't determine what the grammar rules are. There is no secret group of people in the back offices of the Macquarie Dictionary going, well, what are the rules going to be this year? It doesn't happen. Dictionaries reflect the rules that we as a society use and what becomes common practice. So the main thing to remember is not, am I doing this correctly, but does this make sense? Having said all that, some rules are important. You know, I'm a writer, I have to say that. Rules can help us create a shared understanding, and I would definitely recommend that you stick with the spelling rules at the very least, just so that your readers understand when you mean you are versus yours. You can be a little bit judicious about the grammar rules, though, and you can choose to follow which ones you like. Just remember, keep it making sense. I would also say that that probably means you can stop yelling at people on the internet over literally now. I'd like you all to just come to terms with the fact that English changes. Sometimes it changes in ways we're not particularly happy about, but there are better hills to die on. So, don't rely on rules to help you write according to a style. You need to be getting back to your audience all the time, thinking about how they're approaching your writing. I already mentioned that you do this subconsciously to some extent, but one of the problems with being human is that we tend to think all other humans are more or less exactly like us. I hate to break it to you, but that ain't the case. So getting back to technical manuals, the problem with manuals is that they're written by people who understand the technology. And when you know something, it's really, really difficult to imagine what it feels like to not know that thing. This is a phenomenon called mind blindness. It has a few other names as well, but mind blindness is my favorite one. I'd like to show you just a really short video, if we can get this going, that explains how this works in children.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl?
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
And that's another little tree.
Another little tree?
Yeah, right.
Okay. And can you tell me what I see when I look at this from where I'm sitting right here?
An owl.
Okay.
And a goat.
Mm-hmm.
And a little tree. And that. And that.
Isn't he adorable? So basically, when the child was asked, what can I see from here, he explained what he could see on the other side. So the idea behind this is that once we know something, we tend to assume that everybody else knows it as well. And this is really obvious and easy to test and absolutely adorable in children. And the good news is we do grow out of it a little bit. I haven't been able to track down the original study despite a lot of effort, but Steven Pinker gave a talk in 2014 on this topic, and he related this story. There was a study that said the more accomplished a person was at using a smartphone, the less time they estimated it would take other people to learn it. So basically, the better you are at something, the better you assume everyone else is at it too. And that's bad news for documentation. When we're writing about stuff that we understand pretty well, we end up missing out a whole lot of things that we consider too obvious, things that we think go without saying. You can see this in action when you go and read something, you go, who wrote this terrible stuff? Only to realize it was indeed yourself. I've been there so many times. So now that we know that it's impossible to write without leaving bits out, we know that you really shouldn't follow any writing rules. How can we possibly expect to write anything at all? More zombies. The most important thing when you are writing in English is the order of the words. I'm sure when you were at school that you learned that English word order goes subject, verb, object. And that should come pretty naturally to you if you are a fluent or native speaker. So we know that the zombie ate my brains means something very different to my brain ate a zombie. Word order is the whole reason why misplaced modifiers are hilarious. We can work out what the author is trying to say, but they do leave you with an interesting image. Things like, I just saw my neighbour walking her dog in high heels. Tables are for eating customers only. Piano for sale by lady with carved legs. And my favourite, the two sisters were reunited after 18 years at the checkout counter. You get the idea. This is actually a really common example used in beginner English classes to demonstrate why word order is so important. All I'm going to do is put the word only in different places in the sentence. Only he said, I love you. He only said, I love you. He said, only I love you. He said, I love only you. And he said, I love you only. We make the meaning change just by moving that one little word. The reason we have a lot of grammar rules, especially the passive voice one, is to try and make us use a simpler word order. Word order has a huge impact on how readers actually absorb the information you're giving them. And that's because we tend to put more importance on the beginning of the sentence than the end of the sentence. Later words in the sentence are additional information, and if you're reading very quickly, you often skip them entirely. So what if we just find the important bit, rather than implementing a rule? Let's just find the important bit and put it first. Would anyone like to guess what the most important bit in this sentence is? Exactly. It has nothing to, Tuesday afternoon, 3 p.m. and taking a shower, not important. This is the important bit. This, not so important. So if we follow the don't use passive voice rule, we would always put the actor first, followed by the action, and ending with the acted upon. But what if the actor isn't the most important thing? I've just said to put the most important thing first. In a technical manual, we know who the actor is. The actor is you through the entire thing. There's no point in constructing every sentence like that. So we can actually make our writing stronger by putting the emphasis on the action, not the actor. So instead of saying, you install the program by clicking start, you can say, click start to install the program. It's not passive voice that makes writing bad. It's misplaced emphasis. To illustrate, this is a plot synopsis that I found for the start of the original Star Wars film. This is literally the first one I found when I Googled Star Wars plot synopsis. I didn't go looking for a bad one or anything like that. Because that would be cheating, right? Luke is a moisture farmer's boy. Leia is a major figure in a new rebellion against the Empire. Her ship is attacked by Darth Vader, who makes no mention of the fact that he's her dad. She sneaks the stolen plans for the Death Star into R2-D2, who ends up escaping to Tatooine with C-3PO. There's a fair bit going on there. You might have noticed that new characters and information are sort of just popping up as we go along. We've got some zombie action going on here. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but it sounds a little bit like Darth is the one sneaking the plans around, and that's a bit weird. We in this room, I'm assuming we probably know this story, so we can make sense of this pretty easily. And what I want to do, it's a bit confusing because of the word order. So what I want to do is just make some little tiny edits. All I'm going to do is just grab the important information and put it at the start of the sentence. So here we are. Luke is a moisture farmer's boy. Got off to a good start. Leia is a major figure in a new rebellion against the Empire. Darth Vader attacks Leia's ship but doesn't mention that he's her dad. Leia uses R2-D2 to sneak out the stolen plans for the Death Star. R2-D2 and C-3PO escape to Tatooine. So all I've done is changed the word order in the sentences. I've done no other. I probably would edit that further yet, to be fair, but all I've done is very simple layer of editing. So the important part, beginning of the sentence, extra information comes later. So, having now explained all that, I would like to give you a series of bite-sized takeaways to make your writing better. And there's no grammar rules. The first thing you need to do when you are reviewing your writing is to organise it. It helps you work out if you're presenting your ideas in the simplest and most logical order. As much as you can, and we know it's not entirely possible, put yourself into the shoes of your reader and ask the questions they would be asking. Start with what is it, move on to how do I do it, and finish with, is there anything else I need to know? Prune out all the jargon you find. You will absolutely have to use some technical jargon. And obviously that depends fairly highly on what it is you're documenting and who your audience is. But do use it as sparingly as possible, and if you do use it, make sure you define it. However, if you find yourself using business jargon, get it out of there. Things like impact, bleeding edge, phrases like lots of moving parts, you do not need them. Just get them out. Replace them with actual words. It will help make your document more honest and trustworthy, like we were talking about before. Concrete statements are trustworthy. And it will also help people's eyes not to gloss over when they're reading your language. Keep an eye out for euphemism and weasel words. If a thing doesn't work as expected, then you need to actually say that. Acknowledge that software has bugs, we all know it. Things don't always do exactly what they're built to do. Say it honestly, say it in as few words as possible, and always give a workaround or a solution. Don't leave your reader hanging with broken bits and no solution. One of my favorites, kill all adverbs. Adverbs describe a verb and you don't need them. You don't need to tell your reader to simply install or that your software is easily configurable. All that makes them do is feel stupid when it doesn't work, because the document is telling them that it's simple, but somehow they don't seem to be finding it simple. Unless it is really very, very important that your reader turns a screw slowly or gently presses a button, you really do not need the adverb. Look at each sentence on its own, like we did in the Star Wars example. Work out the most important information. Put that first. Use the rest of the sentence to deliver any additional information. Give it a lens to be looked through. If it's important that they read both parts of the sentence, make it 2 sentences. Remember always that you are telling a story. Installing and configuring a hypervisor might not be the most interesting story, but it's a story all the same. Start at the beginning, use real words, be honest, give clear directions, use consistent naming for things, and never ever talk down to your reader. And finally, the most important thing, which I actually stole from someone else, is this phrase. Remember this when you are writing. Try to make sure everything you write says what it means and means what it says, because words mean things. I would love to hear your feedback. And I have plushies.
So, any questions?
Thank you.
Do you have any strategies for checking that blindness in yourself? I sometimes ask, like a junior co-worker or a slightly less technical person, can you think of anything else I can do to make sure?
Yeah, ask the newest person on the team. That's always a good one. A lot of that stuff can be resolved through time. Unfortunately, we don't always have time. So sometimes, if you can give it a week, yeah, that's great. If you can give it a day or give it overnight, that's also good. If you go and get a coffee, go to the toilet and then come back, that's also acceptable. The more time you can give it, the better, obviously. But yeah, time, asking the newest person, even just asking your colleague, hey, can I just have an idiot check? I'm just not sure about this. Also doing the thing. If you're documenting something that is like a thing that you can install, a procedure of some description, just go and do it. Remind yourself what it's like. Especially if it's something you've done a million times before, try as much as you can to look at it through new eyes and pretend you don't know anything. It's hard to do and it's almost impossible to do perfectly. Science tells us that, I guess. But yeah, time, distance, asking other people to review, and yeah, just trying your hardest, I think. Oh, do you want a plushie? Plushie, plushie. Sorry, I forgot I was holding them. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi.
Oh,
Thanks for the
sorry.
talk.
You got the microphone. Okay,
Yeah, I do.
excellent.
Yeah.
We'll come back here next.
Thanks for the talk. It was awesome. So I was wondering if you have any strategies for dealing with the curse of knowledge, because there are some times when to write about a topic, you need to know about it in depth.
Of course, you can't write it if you don't know about it. And
somebody
if you
who's
know
new-
about it, you can't write about it.
And
Yeah.
somebody's new to it can't really maybe attack it with the same depth and clarity that you would need to explain the subject matter. So what would you suggest?
Like I just said for the previous question, yeah, getting the new person to read it is always a great start. Give it as much time as you can. Sorry, in the front.
Yeah, thanks for that. How do you go about a documentation project where there's multiple authors, and so you're going to get multiple styles? How does one go about merging a style? Is there some sort of style council that you have and sit around and talk about it?
To be fair, that's one of the skills of a technical writer, is to be able to adopt different styles. That's why we go to university, to learn a lot of that stuff. Mind you, there's no technical communication degree in Australia anymore, which is disappointing. Practice, I guess, again though, it comes down to looking at that word order. If you can look at that word order and get it into the simplest form. I've been working as a tech writer for a long time, and we sometimes spend days on one single sentence. You can go back and forth and adjust things and argue over it, and everyone will have a different opinion on the best way to get it out. But eventually you will sort of end up with this nice, simple form. And that's the beauty of classic English a lot of the time, is if you are using simpler words, simpler construction, getting the big words out of there, you end up with a kind of style that emerges out of that. Like I say, it's really hard to put rules on this stuff. So eventually it just sort of happens somehow, magically.
Thanks for the talk, Lana.
No trouble.
I was wondering if you could identify, if you read about differences in style, fundamental differences in style between writing and speaking, and yeah, any tips on that?
In identifying it or in doing it?
Yeah, really anything that you would do differently if you were writing something or if you were presenting it out loud.
To be fair, when I'm writing a talk, I actually speak a lot, because I have to say it out loud to see if it sounds natural. So I don't know if I really have any tips in doing that. Again, it's probably just practice. You've got to look really critically at the words you choose. Writing is such a natural thing as adults, because we've been doing it all our lives. We just sort of blurt things out, and it's actually really, it takes a lot of discipline to be able to go back over and go, is that word appropriate? Is that word in the right place? And moving things, like I was saying before, it takes a lot of time sometimes to craft a single sentence. And it's reviewing and going over it. And you get better at it over time. So since we're here at LCA, I was involved in the 2013 conference. Our conference director that year is Michael Still. Every single word that he presented on stage at the housekeeping or that he put out in a press release was written by me. By the end of the conference, I could emulate Michael Still's style without thinking about it. He'd say, oh, can you edit this email for me? And I'm like, yeah, and I'd write it in his voice. And it's just practice, right? That's all it is. So it is one of the skills of a technical writer, certainly, but it's something anyone can learn. It's just, I can't honestly give you step 1, step 2, step 3. It's about looking at every sentence and it's the swing. I guess that's the answer. It's the swing that matters. Oh, I have one more plushie, one more.
So taking a step back from technical writing, what's your take on academic writing? So say, for example, in postgraduate study, you read through articles and things like that, and instead of having a conversation, they're having an epistemological debate and all of that kind of stuff, and you're really swimming through all of this treacle of language, but it seems to be the way it goes. So what's
Academic
your opinion
style
on that?
is a style in and of itself. I have so many stories I could relate about that. Obviously, academics will require you to write in that style, and it's one of the things. I just finished my postgraduate, and it was one of the difficult things about going back to postgraduate study as a technical writer. It's like, oh, now I have to emulate this academic style. One of my very early technical writing talks, it would have been at LCA as well, one of the things I said is you're not at uni anymore. And so at uni, you're given a word count, and you need to write up to that word count. And so we do get a little bit lengthy. We like to impress upon our lecturers exactly how smart we are. We need to say all the things we know. And the whole point is so that someone reads that and goes, oh gosh, that Lana Brindley, isn't she amazing? She knows so many things. I'd like to get to know her. And unfortunately, when you're writing a technical manual, that is not the goal. I don't want anyone writing my technical manual and go, oh, that Lana Brindley wrote this, isn't she amazing? So, exactly. I don't want people to see, oh, Lana wrote this. That's the whole point of choosing a style, is so that voice doesn't come through and you're almost suppressing it, if you like. So it's, yeah, again, though, it's about looking at that word choice, simplifying the sentences down. Unfortunately, when you're in academia, you have to write that way. It's expected. And believe me, you get marked down if you don't. I've tried it. So I've run out of plushies, I'm sorry,
That's all right,
Peter.
you've really given me one. One of the other uses for different styles is to mark you out as being a part of a particular community, and that's where the academic writing comes in.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we're trying to fight against for the big major computer science conferences like SOSP, to try and get people to write more plain language. And it's hard.
It is hard.
So
and
how
I
can we keep
agree,
pushing
it's tribal as well. When you write like that, it indicates that you're part of that tribe. Sorry, there was one up the back here. No? Okay.
I've got one.
Hold on, there's one here first. Room monitor goes last.
G'day, thanks for the talk. This is kind of a meta question.
Yep.
Just because if I'm ever writing any technical documentation, it's quite a small team, and one of the issues I have sometimes is in the same way with writing software, where you kind of are relying on your users to be your bug detectors, effectively. And a user knows, like, oh, I tried to do the thing and it didn't do the thing, right? This is broken, right? Yep. But I'm trying to get my users to understand that if they're reading the documentation and they suddenly just go, oh, you lost me, that's a bug and they should tell me.
They're not.
Because
what happens is they read that and they go, I don't understand what that was
exactly.
talking
And even
about.
if I tell them, they're like,
I'm
oh,
going to go and Google
nice.
it instead and look at this guy's blog that he wrote 3 years ago in a different version. Yeah.
So do you have any ideas about how to...
If you write better, you will engage your readers better. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's the problem, though. Bad writing turns users away. Yeah. And users will not... Users will tell you if there's a bug in the software because they recognize bugs in the software. They don't recognize... Even though we do docs as code, and it is, for the most part, just the same as software, people don't recognize it like that. It's just the writing. I've been to parties and people say, oh, so what do you do? I go, I'm a writer. So what kind of writing do you do? I say, well, I write documentation for software. And so many times I've had people go, oh, I guess someone has to. People don't think about the fact that there are actual human beings who sit down and write that stuff all day long. They go, oh yeah, well, those manuals, I guess a human wrote them. So yeah, people don't think about it as something they could report a bug on. They go, oh, this is terrible, and they go and do something else. So I don't have a good answer for you there. I think we're up to the room monitor. Off you go. I'll give you a sticker.
I guess I was just going to mention that one of my recent sort of pet hates is abbreviations when they're used, especially unnecessarily. Yep. And we are probably all guilty of.
Oh yeah, and that's I'm including that when I say get rid of the jargon. Yeah. That definitely falls under the jargon category. Yeah. There was one more. We might be at time, I think, but.
It's along the same thing. How do you get on with TLA, FLA, three-letter arguments?
Yeah, just don't. Just don't.
At all? Or
so there are exceptions. So there are some things, like we would not spell out hypertext markup language, right? People don't know that's what HTML stands for anymore. But, so you do have to sort of, again, gauge your audience. Sometimes the acronym is going to be better known than the spelled out version. Quite often you can sort of hedge your bets and just put the acronym, put it in brackets, and then move on with your life and hope people pick that up. The big problem we've got with writing for the internet, and especially the way we present documentation online now, they're not in book form anymore. And so if you define it like in the introduction and then you refer to it 3 chapters later, there's no guarantee that they've read the bit that came first. Yeah, so I have a whole other talk on that. It involves Play-Doh, so I highly recommend you come along if you see me doing it. There is a video on YouTube, but it didn't include the Play-Doh bit. So there's a style called Every Page is Page One. It's written by a man named Mark Baker. He has a website as well, Every Page is Page One. Go and check it out. That explains a lot of how that works with hyperlinking instead of expecting a narrative form. It's about getting towards a topic-based method of delivering information rather than a narrative. Mind you, classic prose still stands. Classic prose still tells a story. It's just you're telling a story in a smaller section, and then those smaller sections play well together as individual pieces of the story. But that is a whole other talk. Cool, I think
we're
we're done.
pretty much on time, so
Excellent.
that's it. Everyone, thank Lana again.